Okay. Welcome, everybody, to another session of the 11th Annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Conference presented by Northeastern State University. As most of you know, we have sessions through Friday the 14th. I'm Bob Hales. I'm your moderator. All of our sessions are closed captioned. If you want to view the caption, simply click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Today's session is Infographics, Improving Learning Outcomes for Online Students. And Jillian Yarbrough has over 20 years of experience in industrial training and development in higher ed. And she has learned how to effectively engage distance learning students in an online learning format. And the infographics is, that's an interesting topic. So Jillian, let me turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. So it looks a little bit different on my computer. I apologize for the Zoom. I've put it on full screen for me. If y'all have any trouble seeing, it looks right to me. Just, let me know. I cannot see the Zoom room now, but I've moved it to full screen, I believe. Okay, so as he said, I'm Jillian Yarbrough, and it's getting to be over 20 years now. I began in distance learning in 1997 when I started at Texas A&M University in graduate school for educational human resource development. And I began my graduate assistantship at the Center for Distance Learning Research. And this was a wonderful organization led by Dr. Lloyd Corhonen. And in this experience, I began to look at how we could bring education specifically to rural school districts in Texas. And it was inspiring every day to go and think about how are we bringing education to people who would otherwise not have access to Texas A&M. And it really spurred me. I know some people fall into distance learning, and that's a powerful experience as well. And I am not, I think that's powerful to be on a path and to identify distance learning, but I chose distance learning because I realized that through distance learning, we could bring enhanced life experiences to people, and I wanted to be part of that. So over the last 20 years, I have worked with all kinds of learning management systems, and I have worked with many different universities, and I'm very fortunate to be at West Texas A&M University, where I have administration that says, would you like to try something to enrich the learning experience of your students? Then try it. They are all for trying things that are strategic, that make sense, and they give us lots of resources so we can be successful. I often teach the normal, I always teach the full semesters, but I've gotten into where I teach a lot of summer, and I also teach a Christmas intersession. I mostly teach graduate management courses, and as you all know, we don't change the content, we don't change the resources, but the intersession simply moves faster. You have the same assignments, you have the same tests, you're expected to have the same learning outcomes, learning objectives, but you have 4.5 weeks to do it as opposed to your full semester students that may have 12 weeks. So one of the things I began to want to think about was how am I going to help these students in my intersession classes gain a positive experience, not just an A, not just that they're satisfied, but that they retain and gather all the information that their 12-week counterparts are retaining. That's my goal. I want every one of my students to go out and be an effective, strong, positive manager, right? And that means they need every tool in my class. I don't offer just ridiculous tools to fill time. Every tool matters. And with that said, how do I help them retain this enormous amount of information in just a few weeks? And one of the things I wanted to look at specific to an intersession, could I use infographics to help these graduate students have a positive retention experience moving forward in their careers? So today we're going to look at defining infographics. We're going to assess the characteristics of effective infographics, a description of the instructor experience, my experience using infographics in my intersession, an overview of what my students said. What was their experience like with infographics in this course? And then if there's time, we can dialogue on infographics design. So why infographics? And I mentioned to you, my goal is always high quality learning in every class. And it's a different experience when we condense it down into just a few weeks. And I have tried many things, and I have many positive comments to make about videos, lectures, lecture notes, summary paragraphs, and these different types of things that I use in my class, Zoom meetings, to reach my online students. But I wondered what would happen if I created infographics that are high quality visual learning tools for my students. Yes.
So we are just seeing the editing version of your PowerPoint, not the presentation itself.
Okay. So when I go to the Zoom meeting, where I'm logged in, let's see. It's not letting me go to full screen, and it's not letting me move those slides. Is that?
For the sake of simplicity, you can just click through in the editing version. Like you just changed
Okay.
the slide in the editing version.
Give me a little information about that. The editing version.
Or perhaps you did forward the slide. So you're on the Y infographic slide now.
Yes, sir.
So however you change to that seems to be working.
Okay. When you're looking at this slide, are you seeing Y infographics and now define infographics?
You are focused on the Y infographic slide. We can see in the thumbnail viewer the define. Yeah, there you go. Now I can see the defined infographic slide.
Okay, great. Okay, I know what we're doing now. This is different than any Zoom I've had, but I think we've got it now. So
Okay.
Here's Y infographics.
Yep.
And here's define infographics, correct?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to look at specifically, if I put the infographics in this class, what's going to happen? So we're going to begin by defining infographics. It's a visual image such as a chart or a diagram used to represent information or data. And here's an example of an infographic that I like. It's a very colorful infographic, and it gives an analysis of the Beatles. And it gives each Beatle, it gives the year, it talks about what songs they wrote, when the song was released, key words that they used in the song, and which Beatle has the largest vocabulary. So this is a very powerful, interesting infographic, in my opinion, right? It's giving us a great deal of information, and this would be my goal. I think it's fun. I think it's about an interesting topic. It has colors, and so across the very first line, biggest hit, who wrote the song, what words were used, and who has the largest vocabulary. A lot of information, color-coded, interesting, and this is the type of infographic that I would think students could benefit from in the learning experience. When we look at infographics, they have an interesting history. So when I add something to my class, I think one of the things we have to think about very carefully, there's so many tools, and we go to so many conferences, and we get to see experts doing so many things. And if we don't catch ourselves, what we'll do is see a tool and we'll say, that's fabulous, and it worked well in that person's classroom, I'll put it in mine, right? And of course that makes sense, and it's good to be excited about a tool, but that doesn't mean it's going to fit with your learning objectives. So one of my recommendations before you use infographics or any other tool in your online classroom is to think very carefully, what is it about this tool? What is the history of the tool? Why would I put it in this classroom? How does it line up with the learning objectives? And I do this every time before I put a tool in my classroom, because if we put a tool in the classroom that creates chaos for the student, then we are missing the opportunity to teach. So just to give you a little information, I didn't just think infographic, and that might be interesting. I said, what is an infographic, and what is the purpose, and what is the history? And I'll share a little bit with you about this history at this time. So visualization, this is an old idea, and its maps as old as 8,000 years ago could be considered infographics, and we can see that. The Smithsonian Magazine talks about that in the 11th century, scientists began to think about visual communication and chart how the planets moved through the sky. And I think that's very interesting. Then Joseph Priestley, and of course there's many things going on between the 11th century and the 18th century. This is just a highlight. But in the 18th century, Joseph Priestley began a chart of biography plotting the lives of about 2,000 historical figures on a timeline. So he's using pictures and he's using words to give us an enormous amount of information quickly. In the 19th century, more scientists publishing and needing to communicate data. And this is what has spurred the use or increased use of infographics. We have more scientists that are publishing and needing to communicate large amounts of data. William Playfair, he was an inventor and an economist, 1759 to 1823. He believed he could use illustrations to make data come alive. And when I saw that, I said, that's what I'm trying to do. I want to use illustrations to make information come alive so my students with this condensed learning experience have an enriched experience where they still carry information forward. Florence Nightingale, she used infographics. She created rose diagrams to show death from disease, war, wounds, others. These different colors on the rose diagrams, each one is explaining a different type of death, whether it be other disease or war related. So she could explain quickly to people what was going on, what is causing the mortality. So infographics, we know from the literature, number one, that they have a place in transfer of information, and we can see that from up to 8,000 years. People are realizing we need to combine pictures and information to give pictures and text so we can give lots of information quickly. Scientists, military leaders, economists, politicians, doctors, and educators are all using infographics to share information. We have more data than ever before. One of my favorite quotes, we can rely on a level of data literacy that we couldn't rely on 100 years ago or even 40 years ago. And we know this to be true. We know there is more information out there for us to give our students now than ever before. How will we give them key pieces of information such that they can use it in their jobs, such that they retain it, such that it enriches their career? So the age of data. The age of data is increasing the need or interest in infographics. And there's an interesting way in which Wall Street Journal is using infographics. They produced a fascinating data visualization, the blue feed, red feed, on the journal's website, and it was created by a visual correspondent, John Keegan, and it has an interactive page that shows what Facebook looks like for users that are liberal or conservative. So it has these two feeds, and it has a red feed and a blue feed, and you would pick your different topics, whether it's the Democratic candidates, whether it's economy, different policies, and you can see this dynamic infographic giving you real-time information, combining text and visuals. And I think that that's something that's important as you consider, would infographics be valuable in my classroom? Certainly we want to look at the history, we want to think about the tool, but as you put it in your classroom, you want to think about the potential value for the future, right? And I'm saying that we don't have to have just a static picture, but an infographic for your classroom could be real time, could be dynamic, could be combining information that's coming up, as we speak. We can also look at virtual reality headsets and watching reports from TVs or computers. This is coming, and this is another form, a higher level of infographics. So I wanted to have all of this in mind. Of course, my students do not have virtual reality headsets at this time. If I could get a grant and put those in the classroom, I would love to have virtual reality infographics, but at this time, that my students just had your general infographics that we're talking about. So what is our definition of an infographic? I would enjoy dialoguing. As we know, we've had a little bit of a glitch with my Zoom probably. And so what I'm going to do is keep going on my presentation, and then hopefully there'll be a little bit of time to dialogue at the end where I can switch back to the Zoom screen. But I would like to dialogue. What is our definition of infographics? And I think that we would see there a little bit variation from person to person, but I'm going to say it is a visual that combines text and pictures. So effective and ineffective infographics. As I mentioned, I would never just put a tool in my classroom where I said, that sounds interesting. I'm going to study the tool. What makes this tool effective or ineffective? So prior to putting this into my classroom, I didn't just think infographics. Of course, I did my IRB. Of course, I did my research, my literature review, and tried to identify what would be effective or ineffective. So for you, I hope that these effective and ineffective ideas would reduce the time of study prior to creating an infographic for your classroom. But in effective infographic, we can see, now I like the Beatles infographic that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, but it is a little bit busy. And I think you might agree, it had a lot of information. Is that necessary? You know, and when we're teaching key concepts to students, I would like it to be a little less busy than the Beatles infographic that had so much interesting information. So this is a visual of what is an effective infographic. It's going to have some data. It's going to have some story. And I think that that's really important. Think about that. The reason we're using the infographic is to combine these visuals with this text to spark interest and memory, right? So some kind of story. It's going to be shareable. It's going to be portable, shareable, something that can be transferred, and the design should gain or be interesting, visually interesting, easy to understand, easy to read. And you can see with this Venn diagram, the good infographic has all of these aspects combined. An ineffective infographic, and I think we can see this is ineffective. It's too much information. It's too many arrows. It's what is the point? What are we talking about? And why would there be so many avenues for this discussion? This is too much, right? So I want something more along this Venn diagram that has a key focal point of information that's combining some data, some stories, some shareability, some design. So infographics in my class, remember I'm focusing on the 4.5-week intersessions. I want to support rapid retention of content, and I want to help students organize key course concepts. That's what I think is challenging for students when we give them a lot of information, especially in an online classroom. One of the tools they must have to be effective as online learners, they've got to be able to organize the information such that it makes sense to them. So I always take on, one of my responsibilities is helping them organize this information. And I projected or hypothesized that the infographic would be helpful in this organization process. How to create an infographic? So there's several tools, and I'm going to share with you my favorite. There's many ways to create infographics to put into your online classroom. I've seen instructors be very effective at creating infographics through PowerPoint. Most of us have access to PowerPoint. You could create a slide and share the slide. So that's probably your simplest. You probably have access. It is easy, but it's not as interesting as infographics as if you use an infographic design tool. So we'll say PowerPoint is always an option. and it can be done well. But there's many different tools. If you search infographic design tools, there's VinGag, BeFunky, Visme, Cacao, Snappa, and Canva, and just to name a few. There's many, many options, right? And so one of the factors for me was, of course, is it interesting? Will it create that quality infographic that I talked about earlier that has design, story, shareability, and data? Will it create that? Most important. Second is my budget, right? How much will this infographic cost? And you can see as you go through all of these other tools, they have a monthly fee, $4.90, $4.95, $13. So it's not too much, but I always enjoy a free option. With that in mind, I went with Canva. Over here, Canva, the last option, because it was free. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. What Canva is it's free for the basics. And it gives you, just like PowerPoint is going to give you a slide that you can type your text in. It's very similar to a PowerPoint where you're given a slide, but the infographic with Canva is going to be taller than it is wide. A slide that is a longer visual, a short, wide, the width is short, the length is long, very similar to a PowerPoint, and you can type in your text. So I like that. It is free, and it is free for basic visuals. Once you get into it, though, you're going to want to combine your text and your visuals, and some of the more interesting visuals do cost money. So while it is free initially, and if you stay with your very, very basic infographics, it can be free. If you get in there and you begin to see some interesting visuals, as I did, it's not completely free. So it's easy to use, Canva, easy to use. You drop and drag visuals. You type just like you do in PowerPoint with a text box. There is a clear frame set up so that we have a design that is easy to visualize and easy for the students to use. A great deal of it is free. Some pictures, though, begin to cost 99 cents to $2.99. Something to think about. So here are the visuals that I created. And these stick-figure visuals are more of your free visuals, but I began to really like these more colorful visuals. And I began to think the visual matters. So I did end up spending, 99 cents or $1.99 for some, multiple ones of these. So each infographic really came out to maybe $5 or $6 instead of free. So keeping that in mind. But what I did with each week, I created an infographic and I tried to pare it down to 5 or 6 key concepts that the student must have to be successful in the next week. So my infographic had a summary of these key concepts, which would have been offered in maybe 3 or 4 weeks in the general semester, summarized down for the students in this infographic. And I would give them just motivation 1.0 is your survival motivation and a picture. Motivation 2.0 would be your rewards and your punishment. So it has a reward picture. Motivation 3.0 is going to be your autonomy, your purpose, your mastery. And I was sure to cite them so that the student had the theorist or the person who in our course is credited with this idea. And then I followed with an optional weekly quiz. So they had this infographic at the beginning of the week. And at the end of the week, I gave them a quiz, a very simple multiple choice quiz that was based on the key concepts of this infographic. Okay, here's my week 2 infographic, and you can see my pictures are getting more interesting. And so this infographic may have cost a little bit more. But what happens is you get into Canva, you've got your keywords, your key points, and you find the perfect picture to match, and you're willing to probably pay a little bit of money. So keep that in mind. The key concepts for week 3, again, and you can, each one of these pictures would have cost. So you can see the pictures going up in quality. The students are given this infographic at the beginning of the week so that they know how to organize their key ideas. They're given the summary quiz at the end of the week. These are the key concepts, pictures, and ideas. And really, if they studied this infographic and they can measure which one they have quality, thorough information on, and which ideas they may need to study further. So my experience in creating this infographic, creating the summary keys, one thing that did stand out to me is, you know, I've taught many of these courses for many semesters. I've used many different resources. I have a lot of the information memorized, but when I went to create the infographic, I really had to stop and identify those key points. And I think that helps me stay on point for my lectures. And I think it helped me create boundaries that were meaningful for the students. My experience was that maintaining these consistent infographics helped with comprehension for my students. I could see that the student questions each week generally centered around one of these topics. They were not off topic. To create the infographic was very easy. This was not a challenging tool for me to learn to use. Helped organize ideas not only for my students, it helped organize the ideas for me. Then I used the infographics as a basis for weekly summary quizzes. And these quizzes, again, we begin the week with our key points and end the week with our key points. And we know whatever strategy we use to do that is going to likely increase retention for our students. And so this was the strategy I used. Infographics at the beginning of the week, quiz at the end of the week, many tools that had those same setup where you're giving them key points at the beginning of the week and you're reviewing the key points at the end of the week could be effective. So we couldn't say for sure, is it infographic or is it the system? This system is what I use, and of course, the key information followed by the review at the end of the week is effective. Then the infographics became the basis for my final, my course final. And of course, the final drilled down much deeper than these key overall broad ideas. But the students, I heard them saying they printed out all the infographics and used those to quiz themselves and put boundaries around the information that they would need to reflect on for their final. But here's what I think is the most interesting part of this experience is thinking about what did the students, how did they experience the infographics? What did they perceive, okay? So our student experiences. In the intersession where I first used the infographics, I had 43 students, 41 reported, okay? And it's fully anonymous. They did not in no way required to report or share their information, nor could I link them to their responses. So I asked them at the last, after they had taken their finals, I had 4 questions, I think. Is it 5 questions I asked them about their experience with the infographics. And the first question, were the infographics helpful for summarizing key concepts? And you remember, these are graduate students, so I really expected maybe 10 or 15 students to say the infographics were helpful. And I was okay with that because I think my job is to help every student. I have no problem with creating a learning tool or a learning summary that helps one student. That's good for me. I'm fine with that. So, but I really expected maybe 10, 15. I did not expect 39 to say the infographics were helpful for summarizing key concepts. Of course, we have 2 that said no. There's diversity in learning needs, right? And so this may not have supported the specific learning need of those 2, but it did support for 39. I thought this was interesting too. Which infographic was most helpful? Of course, infographics 1 and 2 were very close, but the other 3 trailed off. And as you remember, I described building these infographics, and I said my early infographics, I was using the more basic picture. And I found myself driven to use the pay pictures, the $2.99 picture, towards the end of the class because I felt like the picture was more helpful. And I wonder, I'd like to study further, was that basic picture, that stick figure, most helpful for retention? What is it that they, what is it that they like better about the first and second than the third, fourth, and fifth? But I think a good takeaway from that is not all infographics have the same value. You couldn't simply say infographics equals positive learning experience. We would have to say students seem to enjoy infographics, and it does depend on infographic design. The third question, did the infographics help you prepare for the final exam? And again, I would have been happy with 10 students. I'd be happy with 2 students saying this was helpful. I would prepare something to help too. But if 33 said yes, these infographics help them prepare for the exam. And for me, as an instructor, I find that a win. I would like to give you content that allows you to have an organized experience in reflecting on course content and preparing for your exam. Did the infographics support your content retention? And this was, remember, my goal. I am giving these graduate students an enormous amount of information in 4 weeks, and I want them to take these tools into their career and be successful. I want them to retain all of these tools so that they are better managers. And the question, did the infographics support your content retention? 39 said yes. For me, that is a win. That is my goal. I want you to retain so that you are a better, more effective manager. Will you create infographics in the future? And one of the avenues that I think we could go down, as if we decide or you decide, I'm going to begin to use infographics in my class. I think it's a good idea. I think you want to research how to create the infographics such that it aligns with the learning objectives and the content, right? And then you share some infographics. But what would happen if instead of me creating the infographics, and I said, if you remember, for me to sit down and create these infographics, I really had to go through the weekly content. I had to reorganize it, and I had to say to myself, what is critical that my students take away this week? And I organized it in that way. Then I had to summarize it in just a sentence, right? Or 2 to 3 words. I wanted the summary of that key point, 2 to 3 words or sentence. And then I had to think about what picture represents this key idea. Now, if I shift that design of infographic to my students, what would happen, right? And that's what I would like to see next. And so what I wanted them to realize is that A, you can use infographics to help retain your information. But what if you're having trouble organizing information? What if you're learning something new? You can create an infographic for yourself and begin to study in that way if it works for you. And we're seeing that 39 of the 41 were saying infographics are working for me. So maybe you create this in the future. If I do this again, I might break the students into groups and have them, each small group, create an infographic for the week to share with their class, not only because the infographic will help the class, but the creation and the design of a quality infographic will help you retain that information. So based on just one small study, so we couldn't, I'm not saying that infographics are always the answer. I would say in this intercession for this course, they were interesting to the majority of my students. I would have to study it further to look at, would it be effective in chemistry? Would it be effective in engineering? Would it be effective in a semester-long course where they have more time to really delve into each idea? But my conclusions from this experience, infographics were helpful for summarizing information. Infographics, infographic number 1 was most helpful. And I think that that's an important takeaway, that even though I used Canva for everyone, even though I designed everyone, so I designed them in the same way with the same strategy, that there was a huge contrast in interest from Infographic 1 to Infographic 4. Infographics helps the students prepare for the final, and this is from the students. Infographics supported content retention, and this was my goal, that they retain the information that I've worked really hard to deliver to them. And then students will recreate infographics to support their own learning in the future. That's what 31 of them said. And think about that. When we're designing a course, isn't it exciting to design a course where we share content that is meaningful? But what about when we design a course in such a way that they not only gain the content, but the experience gives them more tools so that they can be self-directed learners in the future? And this is what was exciting to me. So this application of these infographics, the students are saying some of them may take that learning tool to help them be a better self-directed learner in the future. And I like that idea, because I'm not only teaching management, I'm teaching how to learn, and I want my students to be lifelong learners. So questions to explore in the future. I would like to look at using this experience more for a full session. I would like to look at using it for other topics, economics, finance. So my other colleagues that teach economics or finance, what would they experience? I teach management. So, and then what happens if the students create their own infographics? I really would like to know the answer to that question. So that is an overview of infographics, the history, the pros and cons, some tools for design, my experience in application, and some conclusions. We could brainstorm about infographics or talk about this experience further. I'm going to click on to where I can see you all, I hope, and then we can chat. So I can see the Zoom room, but I can't see the chat box. Let me see. Okay, now I can see the chat box if you all have any questions.
Well, yeah, they've been chatting quite a bit. I hate to say it, but actually we're out of time.
Okay.
But what's the next slide? Does it perhaps have your contact info?
It has
in case they want to ask some more questions.
Sure. I can put my contact info in the chat box.
Okay.
Would that be helpful?
So Victoria asked if you can share the presentation. If you want to,
Sure.
you can send it to me and I'll post it on the conference website under your presentation, or you could have them contact you directly, whatever works best for you.
Sure. Victoria, if you contact me, do you see my email? If you contact me, I'd be happy to share information with you.
Okay, great. Julie, I'm glad we finally got connected here. I've always been interested in infographics, and they're a great way to help students learn and make sense of things. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate as distance and online educators, we always keep going, and I appreciate that you kept going with me until we were connected.
Now, okay, I'm going to wrap this up, folks. In a few minutes, we have another session, so I hope to see you there.